I think you have to think very hard about your story. You have to think about who you are. You have to think about how your trajectory into music has come, but also what you believe in beyond music. So you have to think about the bigger world. So don't try and sort of manufacture a sort of PR version of yourself. Really think about the story that you're telling about you and about your thoughts on the world, because that's really interesting to read about. Whereas just saying, I had a great teacher, which you might have done, but just think about why that teacher was great.
Sometimes I think you feel like you have to be something or be someone in order to, not to be listened to, but because you feel like you maybe have to fit a mould or fit into something, that you've been given this interview, so you need to say these things. And that pressure only really came from myself, from reading other interviews. And then I realised, actually, I can just say what I think or, what I've done.
You've got to get personality across. That's what people are engaging with. They're not really engaging with a piano, or they're not really engaging with a Mozart sonata. They're engaging with you as a performer. And if you can present something which is honest, has integrity, and is endlessly interesting, then people will take notice of you. You will make your mark, because it will be different through being honest. You necessarily make it different from everybody else, because you're putting across, you're communicating from here, rather than, as Ash says, through some version, some polished version that you think has to be put across for the sake of showbiz.
I think if you're really honest about who you are, as you say, the role of music in the world, why do we play music? Why are we doing this? Why do we spend so many hours in the practice room? Why do we go on stage? Why do we feel it's important to share the great literature of the past and of the future with audiences? I think asking yourself all of those questions, and in the way that you deliver your art, being true to it, is the thing that will really make you stand out and make you a true artist and be fulfilled in your work.
Particularly when you're starting out, do try and actually meet the interviewer and the journalist. I mean, we get a lot of interviews that happen via email or via phone because people haven't got time to do this and that. It's worth waiting until you've actually got a bit of time and space to spend time with somebody, so that you can get to know them a bit. I mean, not for hours on end, but perhaps give an interviewer an hour of your time, and let them meet you, so they can get an impression of who you are, and particularly your early interviews. I think it's really important that you come across as a personality. So if somebody says, "Oh, have you got 10 minutes on the phone?" say, "Well, no, it'd be great if I could meet you," because I think that does make a huge difference to the sort of profile that will then come out. The worst thing you can possibly say in an interview is, "That was nice," or "That was lovely," or "I really enjoyed that," or never use those sort of. Never use cliches, and never use those sort of generic. Don't be generic. Never be generic. Always try to say something that you really feel.
So I really built very strong partnerships with a small number of people who, many of whom are still my closest chamber music partners and friends. And I think that's something that's very important, rather than trying to see what's fashionable or jump onto what everyone else is doing. Find what is really working for you.
People are always asking about making classical music more accessible, and I don't think that it's the music. I think that it's the labelling and everything that goes with the music. So I've been thinking a lot about how to try and kind of overcome that. And for me, it's just viewing music as music and playing, for me, music that I love to as many people as possible.
With more unusual instruments, I don't know whether you feel this, Jess, or not, but because the repertoire just isn't known, you don't have this baggage of comparison that so many artists have. And how many times have we been sat in a recital hall where we've heard the Bach suites, and some old duffer goes, "Oh, of course I heard Casals play that in 63, and it's been downhill ever since." And you think, well, these poor people, how does any new cellist or pianist or lyric soprano or whoever bear the weight of this comparison, not just with rose-tinted spectacle performances, but also just of the number of recordings there are. You can go on Spotify or YouTube and hear perfection for 365 days a year. This is impossible. Whereas if you're coming in and playing unusual music, or even better, brand new music, because what I find is that all these people who play unusual instruments are creatives.
I think that thing of sort of having an identity is very important. I think places where you make music and who you're making music to is part of your identity as a musician. And so I think that's something it's good to think about.
I suppose what we do as managers is that we can sense what's popular, we can sense what people are yearning for, we can sense what there's a thirst or a hunger for, and we can relay that to our artists and therefore maybe try and sort of steer them in the right direction. But I think often that steering will come ahead of the idea. I mean, I can't honestly think, even with some of my wackier artists, of many occasions where they've come to me with something which is so outlandish that it's not pitchable to somebody. If you're an interesting artist coming up with an interesting idea, there's almost definitely going to be somebody who's interested in putting it on somewhere. So it's not that we should be turning our backs on core repertoire. If you have a distinctive artistic personality, whatever you do is going to be novel, new, and interesting to people.
I think it's interesting because what you were saying before about meeting people and making relationships with people, at the end of the day, the recording company is made up of people. So I'm really lucky to be working with people who understand what I want to do, and have talked to them a lot and met with them a lot, and would prefer to go and meet with them rather than speak on the phone. I have a clear vision in my head of what I want to produce. So if I can tell them and somehow get it over to them, then they generally tend to be behind it. But I think it can be a difficult thing sometimes, of feeling like you have to do something because there are a whole team of people that want you to do it, and it can sometimes be quite daunting to stand up to that and to say what you believe. I think you just have to if you can, have a clear vision and try and stick to it.
Bringing together repertoire, presenting it in quite a sort of an unusual way, but then also building into that a sort of a live component, so you get you're performing live and then selling the CD or whatever it is. I think it's important to think about sort of packages rather. You as an individual have to have a wide range of ways of presenting yourself, and CDs are just one of them.
YouTube and streaming, as all of those outlets are fantastic in terms of the huge audience that you can reach, which you otherwise wouldn't be able to reach. Like, you could have millions of streams, literally millions of streams. You would never sell millions of CDs.
I think the only way of actually controlling it, going back to Talis' original point, is that if you have to be the content creator yourself. You've got to steer people towards the good stuff. So make sure that you're doing what you can to make the things that you want people to see as visible as possible. But if you don't have the kind of a machine of a big company behind you, you've got to find other ways of doing it. So maybe through your own social media channels, through your networks. That way you just get people clicking on things, because that's how it comes up top of Google.
You can't control some things if something's gone up, or you can't be policing it the whole time. There's no time for that. But making sure that when you are using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any of these means, you're really clear about why you're posting something. What's it for? Who are you trying to reach? Who are you trying to speak to? And that can be lots of different people at different times. But as long as each time you really are thinking about the implications of what you're posting. Is it just trying to draw their attention to something that you're interested in? Is it trying to connect as a person? So just by retweeting something or thinking, I'm really interested in this new book, that's equally as valid if you're thinking of that, this is about me.
And also remember that there are online trolls. That's
There are online trolls.
When people are behind computer screens, sometimes you can tell that it's not necessarily about the music. And I think it's quite, especially with things like YouTube and where people just write things without thinking and forget that that's actually going to a real person. I know that can affect people quite a lot.
Depends a lot on what kind of career you want. It depends a lot on your temperament. Depends on what's right for you. It's sort of what it all comes back to in a way, is doing what's right for you, being true to yourself. Some people really flourish in the competition environment. I don't think there's any sort of one way of doing things.
So I would say do competitions if you want to. The benefit of it is being seen by people. Look who's on the jury. I often, for singing competitions, which we probably look at slightly more than anything else, if the jury is just a load of very famous old singers, then I'd say that the competition's not very useful to go on. Whereas if the jury is full of senior casting people from Bayreuth, Covent Garden, Wiener Staatsoper, then you're essentially doing a really high-level audition in the best possible circumstances.
So it's not all to do with winning, it's actually trying to introduce the public to a bigger sense of what being a musician is all about. And actually a lot of competitions are almost run as festivals now rather than as competitive events.
At school, and say sports day, and all the teachers say to you it's the taking part that counts. I hated it every single time. I always wanted to win at things that you could actually win at. You can cross a finish line first. In music, it's so entirely subjective and such a completely different mindset that it genuinely did feel like it was the taking part that counted.
So there's a visibility aspect. But so we've had artists who have done a few, not been so successful, and then suddenly won quite an important competition. And then immediately that's opened, as Ben said, it gives a little snapshot, it's a window. But equally, we've had other artists who have bypassed all competitions because it's just not them. They just don't like that pressured situation, they don't perform nearly as well, they feel much more constricted when they're performing, they feel they're always aware of these people watching, they're just not a free performer. And they've had equally, if not sometimes even more successful careers. Look at the environment, what can you gain from it? And as long as you go in with very clear sort of outline of your relationship to the competition, then I think it can be a good tool.
Everybody in classical music likes talking about one thing, which is music. Everybody's just seen a performance and had an opinion on it, so they've got something to talk to another musician about. So networking doesn't have to be difficult. It's just talking to like-minded people about something which really inspires us all. And if you think of it in those terms, then networking, just use a different word. Here we are. Let's just chat about music.
People love to be asked advice, or to be asked, can they be of help? And I think it's just not being too afraid to just use the people that are already within your orbit. I always see someone's biography when I go to a concert or I'm looking at an artist that I don't know. I don't just read the biography, even though a lot of them I think are terribly written because they're just the most boring list of things that you see. But when you start, for me, if you look at biography, I like to see it as a treasure map. And there's always hidden things within it. And when you start looking again at connections, it's like, oh, there's this date and this date. Oh, I wonder how that happened. What was the connection there? And you can piece together so many things about how an artist got somewhere if you read a biography in a very interesting way.
You should keep your ears open for sort of the exciting things that are going on, being done by experienced people who already have a profile and say, how can I fit into this? Because actually I've got something to offer.
Anything that makes you think again is good. I think we should never stop questioning ourselves, asking why are we doing things in a certain way.
I think there's two words that I keep coming back to from everything today: communication and being individual and sort of true to what you're doing at whatever level that is. I really think it's important.